It's on.
Yep, it's going.
Hi, everybody.
Marie's back. Yay.
Hello. Welcome to this Monday's This Is Not Therapy Hour, brought to you as always by Effective Artistry. I think there's a little bit of an echo.
Is there?
Game? Yeah. I think it might be at your end. Anyway, if you're watching, hi, welcome. Happy Monday. My name's Marie. I'm an executive functioning coach at Effective Artistry, and I'm joined as always by Brandon Tessers, LCPC and Clinical Director of Effective Artistry, and Caitlin Miller, LCP. The title of the show is This Is Not Therapy. So it's an open conversation. It's a chance for you to ask questions of Caitlin and Brandon about any topic related to neurodiversity or mental health or the fields of therapy and coaching. Effective Artistry is a neurodiversity affirming therapy practice based in Northbrook, Illinois, offering therapy anywhere in the state of Illinois and coaching anywhere in the world. You can find more information on effectiveartistry.com. With the housekeeping out of the way, I will say hello.
Hello. Are you still hearing an echo for yourself?
No, it's gone now. Thank you.
Good. If anybody in the chat hears it, let us know. Thank you, Marie. Good to see you.
And you? How are you doing today?
Doing all right. A little sweaty. I've been on the phone, and when I'm on the phone, I usually pace around a lot and sweat a little bit. So a little sweaty, but
Gentle exercise.
Sure. But I'm good. How are you?
Good. Yeah.
How are you?
I'm all right. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad to be here
It's
with
turning
both
into
of you.
fall and it's so beautiful. I'm going for fall weather.
Yeah. I like fall, okay, but it's getting colder and the days are getting shorter, and I don't like cold and short days. So, what are we talking about today?
Well, I could not come up with a topic. This week I have been thinking a little bit about interoception and how people who identify as neurodivergent often feel disconnected from our bodies. And I read a piece. If I can find it again, I know I shared it. I read a lovely piece on identifying later in life as neurodivergent and how a lot of coming to terms with that is connected to coming to terms with the fact that you have been disconnected or possibly have been disconnected from your body in some way, and rediscovering what it is that you like and you don't like, flavors you enjoy, textures you enjoy, things like that are kind of a way of processing all of that. I thought it was a really nice piece. I will find the author name and I will link it in the chat. So that's what I've been thinking about.
Interesting.
How about you two?
I've had clients who've talked about sort of a grief regarding their neurodivergent identity, like 30 plus, something like that, and coming to a place where they identify that way and then being like, oh, I have been disconnected from my body and misunderstanding my way of moving through the world for so long. So yeah, they'll get to a point of kind of grief-ish.
Grief over what?
Grief over their past, their identity, their conceptualization of pathology,
Well,
their
what is it
relationship
that
with their body.
All those things have caused them to lose. Grief is about loss.
Yeah, that they could have had that time, and almost that time was like wasted or taken away from them because they weren't living in their like full identity.
And if they had been, what would have been different?
I think that's a great follow-up question. And what would they say? I think a lot of these clients, they usually feel regretful of maybe the choices they've made. Like they felt like the choices weren't in alignment with their identity. I don't know. Tell me what you're thinking, Brandon.
Well, this is all very interesting and kind of tragic and hilarious in a tragic way and ironic, because I'm synthesizing everything that both of you are saying into like a singular, a common touch point, that I do think that generally speaking, neurodivergent people who identify as being neurodivergent pay more attention, spend more of their resources, attention, energy, awareness on the cognitive environment as opposed to the physical environment, and the body exists in the physical environment. Uh, and the funny but tragic thing is, I suppose, that when you come to realize that, if your response is to say, oh, I should have been different or things should have been different, well, that's the problem perpetuating itself, right? That what should be is not an invalid thing to consider, but it is a cognitive thing to consider. You're thinking about a thing which is not happening, but which might be better if it were to happen, or in this case, shifting it into the past that things might have been better had it happened, as opposed to observing what is happening.
Yeah.
So they're experiencing grief because they feel like they should have done it differently. They should have been treated differently. Their experience should have been different, without any explanation or investigation of, well, what was your experience? And what about it would you have liked to have been different, as opposed to just, oh, I think I did it wrong, or it was being done wrong.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of reminds me of the sticky answer paradigm of like trying to answer this existential question cognitively and using a disproportionate amount of cognitive resources, which is part of the problem to begin with, and then going through a period of focusing on solving the problem cognitively.
Yeah.
And then realizing, damn, that didn't work either. Now what do I do? And then Brandon comes in and says, well, what's happening in the moment?
I mean, there's a lot of, I think a lot of the problems associated with the experiences that we would commonly identify as being associated with identifying as neurodivergent, right? Like the traits of a person, the things that they tend to experience and do and feel and think that correlate with then identifying as being neurodivergent. Those things, they have some good, they have some bad, right? Like they help you with some things, they make you well suited to some things. They hurt you in other ways, they make you poorly suited to other things. On that side of the equation, the things that they hurt, the ways they harm you, and the things that they make you poorly suited to, a huge proportion of that, I think, can be explained kind of by you pay less attention to the reality of what is happening in the physical environment, including your own body, than maybe other people do, or than you do to what's happening in the cognitive environment. In other words, neurodivergent people typically really spend a lot of their time saying, why is what is happening, and how should it be different? What would be better than what is happening? More so than they spend on what is it that's happening and how would I like it to be different, right? So they'll say, like, how do I make this better, without ever identifying what would be better if you were to do that? Like,
well, and I think one of the problems of focusing so much on the why is sometimes they get the observable aspects of reality wrong, and then they're asking why to something that didn't actually ever happen or isn't actually happening.
Yeah, well,
on top of all the other consequences of it.
We who identify as neurodivergent love rules. Yeah, we all identify as being neurodivergent, and we love rules. Everything we're sitting here and talking about is our attempts to sit and understand and explain why things happen to people the way that they do. And of course, we're trying to keep it focused through the lens of, in what way is exploring that question actually useful to changing something for somebody? Yeah. But yes, we love rules. We love being like, oh, this thing is happening because I did this thing wrong. I still, to this day, struggle with, when I get tired, being like, what is wrong? How am I tired again? As opposed to the reality that getting tired is just a thing that happens. It's a signal that you're tired, right? Like that there's something in you that is depleted or damaged and needs to be rested or repaired. That instead, my mind immediately jumps to, okay, let me look at all the variables of what's been happening recently because I shouldn't be this tired. And as long as we keep thinking of it that way, which, again, not a bad thing, it makes us very good at and well suited toward some things, but has some downsides. And the downsides are things like this, that we become so caught up in what is the right way or wrong way to do something, the proper versus accurate, inaccurate, right, wrong, whatever you want to say, as opposed to just what is happening, including, as a very important subset of what is happening, is to what extent do I enjoy what is happening? What is my experience right now, as opposed to comparing my experience right now to what I think it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of I am tired, it's I'm more tired than I should be. And that changes everything about how you evaluate it.
Mm-hmm. I think the what is happening that I enjoy is a really profound question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to say why or?
What do you mean?
Oh, that's
why.
why. That's a why. I don't know. When I ask it to myself, I think it's really helpful. When I ask it to clients, I think it's really helpful. And then I think there's like a sociological component of it, is that if we all start doing things that we enjoy more, how much better would the world become?
Sure.
Yeah,
Well,
and it ties into what you were talking about a couple of weeks ago about finding joy or noticing joy
Mm.
and how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think there's kind of this in-between thing that gets overlooked a lot, where people will talk about the internal experience as totally subjective and the external things as objective, right? So when people will set goals,
Mm-hmm.
they're encouraged to do SMART goals, like an objectively observable thing.
Mm-hmm.
But internally, there are multiple different things happening, and some subset of what's happening internally is just observation of your own state. Saying, I am happy right now, noticing that you're happy right now, that's an observation. That's not a thought or a decision or a plan. You're just observing something. I enjoy this. I like this. I want that. I don't want that. I'm afraid of this, like what you are in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And those things often then lead into next steps, analysis. I'm afraid of blank because, and now I'm talking about cognitive and whatever stuff. I'm no longer just talking about the fact that whatever the reason, I am afraid of that thing right now. And so that middle ground gets lost. People will tout the virtues of focusing on what's observable, and like mindfulness and things like purely coming into the external physical environment, or including the body to awareness of the body. Or the other way, where people like psychology and quite commonly therapy will focus a lot on the thinking and the analysis and the distortions and the blah, blah, blah. And this middle ground gets missed of observing your own experience, which is what's happening. Do you like it? People will struggle with the question, what do I want? But want is just a future shifted, I like. When I like a thing, I want more of the thing. So if somebody's struggling to say what they want, it indicates that they don't know a lot about what things have happened that they have liked. Neurodivergent people, especially because of the nature of what it means to be someone who identifies in that way, we tend to be, as a group, looking for new and better rules. And so when people are trying to help us, including we ourselves, members of our own community, are trying to help ourselves and other people, we very much tend to offer new and different rules, right? Like, well, if you pay more attention to your body, then things will be better. Or, which is fine, because there's value in all of these things. But when it gets framed that way, a very common reaction is, oh, well, what have I missed out on by not doing it this way all along?
Yeah.
I've been doing it wrong. I've not been following this rule. A lot of the time, people, when they really can objectively look back, and will say, like, no, there have been some parts of my life that have really sucked, but 80% of it has been enjoyable or better. And that just gets lost in, well, even if I enjoyed it, it could have been even better than it was if I was doing this thing differently that I'm now learning to do differently.
Yeah.
And so it turns something that you have no problem with into something that all of a sudden you're very sad about, which is sad to me. We don't need extra things to be sad about.
No, we don't. Not at all.
I found the piece that I was reading. It's called Reclaiming Our Weird Ways of Being by Sunny Hallett, and it's a talk they gave in Glasgow. And there's just a nice little piece in it I wanted to read out. When I first started reconnecting with their body, I guess, with themselves, and for various reasons, it was quite a dramatic process for me. It was like being brand new, and I still feel a lot like that. So this is sort of a more optimistic, being in the moment kind of observation rather than one of regret. And they say, one day I was walking past an ice cream shop and I realized that I didn't know what ice cream flavor I liked. I'd made so many of my decisions intellectually and was so used to not really being in touch with my senses and feelings that I always used to try and make a sort of logical decision of what ice cream was best. It was amazing being 32 or 33 years old, standing in an ice cream shop, tasting ice cream as if it was for the first time, because I felt like I could really feel and connect with my body without anything much standing in the way of that feeling and connection. I don't know, something about it spoke to me. I just thought it was.
It's very evocative, and I like it a lot. I like what they're saying. The issue, I guess, a lot of the time for neurodivergent people is the reliance on language.
Mhm.
Right? That I really like what I believe I am understanding this person to be saying, and the language that they're using is not very easily distinguished. It's not very specific, right? Like disconnect, reconnect, feeling new, born again. Like these are all very evocative things, but how do I know if what I'm experiencing counts as those things? Which I don't think ultimately matters or is what is the most beneficial for people to think in response to this. But it is very commonly what neurodivergent people will think in response to things like this. They'll say, wow, that sounds so great. I want that for myself. And then they try to do what this person is suggesting to them to do. And then when it comes to evaluating whether or not it worked, well, that's the whole problem, is that we don't really focus on evaluating whether something is working for us, just whether we're doing it correctly.
Yes.
So how would you say in the ice cream example this person could evaluate what's working for them?
Well, a couple different things, and I don't mean this to sound critical. This person is doing a different thing than what I'm trying to do, and
I thought you acknowledged like the beauty of it too.
And just different phrasings for different people in different situations and whatever. I'm translating it in a different way for like in the way that I speak, and with an assumption that the people who show up to this stream that way of speaking works for them and whatever. So
I should just say for context, it's part of a very long talk, so there's a lot of background there that I've left out just by reading that one passage.
But there are two things that jump out to me right away as potentially causing problems for people who are hearing or reading this. One is the underlying implication that the previous way of doing things was wrong.
Wrong, yeah.
That I had always been intellectually trying to decide what I should eat. I didn't even know what I would like, which reinforces an idea that there is an incorrect way to go about making these decisions. Intellectually determining what you should get is just as much a way of figuring out what you like as any other way. It's not a sensory way, and so we might want, and it seems to be that is what this person is trying to emphasize, is that I was utilizing intellect to the extent that I wasn't paying very much attention to my sensory experience. And then when they're talking about it tastes like it's new, to me that's a very simple explanation of I am, for whatever reason at this point in time, taking in sensory data, paying attention to information in a depth and in a detail that I have not previously. So I literally am consciously, at least for the first time, noticing things about this experience that I either have never noticed before, or it was so long ago that I don't remember it at all. But when we take it away from just saying intellectual versus sensory or whatever the specific identifier is, and say instead how I had been doing it this way to determine what I liked or what I wanted or whatever, those more general things, the implication, whether they intend it this way or not, and I doubt that they intend it this way, comes across that that's the bad way of doing it, and the way I'm doing it now is the good way of doing it. And that if you're struggling, it's probably because you're doing it that bad way, and that if you switch to doing it this new way that I'm doing it now, that will be better and it will fix it for you. We love general language, even when we're not trying to say that stuff. In fact, a very common neurodivergent person's complaint, one that I have had many times in my life, is they're taking what I'm saying as though it applies in some big and broad way when I'm just trying to say a specific thing, which often happens because we use big and broad language without recognizing that that's what we're doing. That we almost sometimes will do politician speak without meaning to. In an attempt to be so specific and clear, we're actually saying a million words that don't really mean much of anything to anybody. And then because we think if we say more of those words, we'll be even more clear, we double down and it gets worse.
I'm kind of thinking of balance, like a combination of what you read, Marie, and what you're talking about, Brandon, is that instead of I am a neurodivergent person, I have a problem, what is a rule that can solve this problem? Maybe it's I am a neurodivergent person, I have a problem, what have I not been doing that I could incorporate in a way that is balanced, where I'm not saying I'm going from completely cognitive environment to completely physical environment, but something about being able to toggle between the two at various levels that helps them live a better life.
Yeah, of course. I think that's great. I tend to like to talk about tension versus balance because of the implications. I don't like the implication that there is some way to preemptively know. Like balance to me, I can be balanced without ever tipping too far to one side or the other. Where tension to me is I'm being pulled in opposite directions, and when I get pulled too far in one, I can lean into the other.
Yeah, I think of that as balance, but I understand that I think tension could be more specific language that would be helpful to like navigate through the world.
Well, it's
I feel
as
like
with
it's
all
more
this stuff, it's
useful.
just different words that people interpret in different ways. And yes, I find tension to be more useful for the reasons I was saying. And because to me, tension tends to imply more active, like balance seems more, oh, once you find balance and you are balanced, you are relaxed, you don't ever notice, which then gets interpreted sometimes by people, including myself, to be like, oh no, I'm tired, I'm out of balance. Instead of, no, the tension is something that you're constantly trying. It is balance still.
Yeah.
It's the same thing either way, but just the way that people interpret the word.
Yeah, I think of balance as, this is probably doing exactly what you were just talking about, Brandon, but like homeostasis, like that a system can have new things integrated into it, and maybe the homeostasis changes slightly, but there's always like actual changes happening within the system, which is exactly what you just said neurodivergent people do.
Well,
but
right,
anyway,
like,
that was my way of saying tension is a great way to put it, Brandon.
effectively, like, I think the pattern of this is, as humans, the whole point of being able to think about things is to be able to solve problems preemptively, proactively, make things better in the future by doing something now.
Yeah.
Which might not be the optimal thing to do right now, but we do because we have a belief, we've worked through things, thoughts and analysis that tells us doing this now, even though it's in and of itself not the greatest, will be better for me later on. It's inherently a valuable thing to do. So we all do it to some extent. I think sometimes a big part of the problem is when you do that very, very effectively, and when you're incentivized to continue to do it more and more and more and more, that you lean further and further into predicting the future and making decisions in the present based off of what would be optimal for the future without paying as much attention to what's optimal in the moment. So out of balance or, being pulled too much by attention. And a very specific thing that makes that way worse, and that neurodiversity as a mindset is attempted to resolve, but the medical model is the problem, is when I think, if I make a prediction about how the future will go and behave in the moment in some way which is otherwise suboptimal, right? I do something unenjoyable because I think it will pay off later. And then in the future, if it doesn't pay off that way, if you believe in the medical model, the next thought is, dang it, I failed to predict the future. That's the problem here. I should continue to try to predict the future, and I should continue to make all my decisions based off of that way of thinking about things. I just need to get better at predicting the future. As long as you think it's about your deficiency, oh, I was wrong, I wish I had realized at that point, whatever. It stops you from ever looking at like, okay, maybe I am overly weighting, giving too much weight in my decision-making process to what happens later on. Or maybe I am too accepting of other things that other people have told me about that influence the way I'm predicting things will go. Like, for example, that hard work will pay off, that there's reasons I believe that and factor that into my calculations of what I'm doing and how it will pay off in the future. Everybody's telling me that. And then when it doesn't, instead of saying, well, maybe this thing that everybody's been telling me isn't exactly accurate or I've been over relying on it, I just say, oh, I must not have worked hard enough. It can't possibly be that what everybody's been saying is inaccurate in some way.
Yeah.
So it all just gets turned in. I messed up. I wish I knew I had been able to live differently. I wish I had paid more attention to these things. That was the other part of it that stuck out to me, is not just the implication of there being a wrong way, but specifically that they said I was able to experience it in a new way without anything in the way. That the idea is that it's addition by subtraction, that I've been doing things or been thinking things or whatever that I had to get rid of in order for my experience to be better, which is evocative and wonderful, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in terms of what we're talking about, is not actually possible for a human to do. You can't actively eliminate a thought or get rid of a memory. We do forget things, but you can't make yourself do that. What you can do is add new things. What this person has done is to say, I think it is valuable or would be valuable to me to pay much closer attention to the sensory experience of eating an ice cream cone. That's a new thing that helped them to do a new thing that they enjoyed.
To me, it made me think about, it made me think about mindfulness. That just mindfulness as a practice, mindful eating, it's a buzzword now. And that's what it jumped out at me, that they were just having a moment of paying attention to something different.
I mean, it's very much a mindfulness practice.
Yeah.
Focus on the feeling of the food in your mouth. Focus on the flavor of the food in your mouth. That's the sensory component. And then the other component of the mindfulness is pay attention to how you're responding to that feeling. Do you like the feeling? Do you not like the feeling? Do you enjoy the taste? Do you not enjoy the taste? But it's all about just observation. And it's wonderful. And I think it is probably more beneficial on average for neurodivergent people to look into mindfulness than it is for the average person. But I also think it's beneficial if there's what's the word I'm looking for? Not a dial. Barometer, yeah. But
Scale,
what's just
measurement.
like any, like gauge. Gauge. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
If there's a gauge that measures like neurodivergence as a whole, then I would feel very confident in saying that humanity as a whole is moving further and further and further toward the neurodivergent side of the gauge. Even though individual members are still much further in that direction than the average or than other people. But as a species, we're moving further in that direction. I have reasons to think of it that way. And it really,
I love that.
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
I tend to agree. But now I'm supposed to ask, what do you mean by that before I just agree?
No, that's fine. What were you saying though, Marie?
I was just asking the same thing. Why do you think that?
Because of what I think neurodivergence is. And the reason I'm bringing it up right now is because I think mindfulness is a more helpful concept to the average person in our culture than it was to the average person in the culture of 50 years ago or 200 years ago or whatever. As time moves on, all people are shifting, or not all people, but on balance, statistically, right? People in general are shifting in such a way that things like mindfulness are much more valuable to us now than they would have been in earlier times.
Yeah.
And it really has a lot to do with what we're talking about. My concept of, because remember, as I always notice how I'm always saying people who identify as neurodivergent rather than neurodivergent people, because I don't think that there is an actual categorical distinction between some people are neurodivergent and some people are neurotypical. Unless you define those words very specifically in a different way than most people tend to use those words. But people tend to think of it as neurodivergent people's brains are different and neurotypical people's brains are the same, which is not possible. It's the opposite of what neurodiversity is meant to be. If you mean it as neurotypical people believe that they are normal and neurodivergent people believe that they are not, then that works. We can categorize it in different ways. But anyway, I think what underlies it, what we are commonly talking about as being neurodivergent, is really a shift in focus to the cognitive and intellectual environment as opposed to the physical environment. And for very real and I would say inevitable reasons, like all humans throughout all of history have been incentivized, as we currently are, to make things better for themselves and for whomever else that they care about, right? And we're actually really great at that as a species. Like I'm sitting in an air-conditioned office in a comfortable piece of furniture and nice clothes, and we're talking to each other from halfway across the world in real time. And anybody in the world with an access to an internet can watch and join. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And physical discomfort, as Maslow would point out, right? Like you address those the hierarchy of needs, the pyramid. You address them from the bottom up. Until we have resolved everybody's starving all the time, we're not really going to be moving on to does everyone feel heard and loved all the time. So over the history of our species, we resolve the bottom stuff first and then move up. And there's a lot to be said about colonialism and capitalism and hierarchical structures and whatever, and how people disproportionately benefit from those things. But the average quality of life is still higher for a human today than the average quality of life a million years ago, 1,000 years ago, whatever. In other words, we are getting very good, we have been very good at making it so that physical discomfort and physical pain and whatever doesn't tend to be as prominent in our lives as it was in the lives of prior humans. It's not everybody, obviously, and some people are worse off or theoretically worse off than they would have been a long time ago and so on. But we by and large are the problems that, especially in our culture, Western culture, which no matter who you are, if you're in Western culture, there are benefits you enjoy of being higher up or associated with people higher up in that hierarchy. If for no other reason than just infrastructure, roads that exist and whatever,
Clean water.
It tends to be that the problems of our life are primarily cognitive and intellectual, more so than physical. There's not none with the physical, but we're literally in a state where, for the most part, we have to put conscious effort into utilizing and taking care of our bodies because there's nothing inherently about our lives, for the most part, that requires us to do it that way. You can move through your day-to-day life, and that's not a bad thing. If some people, I think, will think of that as like, oh, people are getting overweight or lazy, whatever. No. Because that also means that people who are disabled, physically disabled, that would not have been able to persist or survive, are able to in ways that they couldn't have before. We have changed the structure of things so that physicality is less important than it used to be. Not important at all. Not that there's no differences, they're significant. But so yes, we're all more, on average, I think, focused on questions of what in the past would have been thought of as like, oh, those weird people that sit around and talk about what is the meaning of life and whatever. The rest of us are just working on like bringing in the harvest and whatever. But some of those guys get to just hang out in the ivory tower and talk about stuff for fun because they don't have to do anything. The
ivory tower is Twitter now. Or no,
like,
just get those kind of half jokes.
I have been, by the standards of our culture, I have been for much of my life impoverished, right? Like I have been living a life that is below average in terms of income and quality of life and what not now, but for the majority of my life to this point. I, at no point during that, would have willingly traded my life for even a literal monarch's life from 200 years prior. Right? Like the best lives that people got to live 200 years ago is below what even an impoverished, not all, I was not like the worst off of the worst off. But median, we could at least say, like a median average existence is physically far more comfortable. So what is that?
You'd be considered an old man at this point in your life.
Yeah. Like the life expectancy shifting is a big part of that, which also, by the way, comes with big downsides. Like a lot of, I think, what we as a culture are struggling with, as a world are struggling with, in large part because of our culture, is for the first time in human history, a single generation of people have had and maintained power for 40 plus years. That has never happened before. It's not how any of our cultural institutions or like instinctual responses to authority, none of it was designed around the idea of a group of people being in power for 40 years. And there's, I think, almost hilarious things like in the United States, at least, every year for the month of December, we all just pretend it's the 1950s again. Like the music on the radio comes from the 1940s and 50s and 60s.
I love their voices.
The movies on television that everybody
Yeah.
watches come from that time
Yeah.
frame. The image of Santa Claus that we all talk about is from the 1950s Coca-Cola advertising campaign. The idea of the nuclear family, isolating individually, you spend it with your nuclear family in your house. That's from the 1950s. The whole thing that we think of as nostalgia and Christmas is just a massive group effort to recreate the childhoods of baby boomers for 1 out of the 12 months of the year. Like 1/12 of your time is spent on that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not trying to get into all these politics and stuff. I'm just saying
I love this.
the
This
nature
is great.
the nature of our lives has shifted to the point where it isn't really worth paying that much attention to your body anymore. That's why it's not a deficit. Like,
Well, I was thinking when you were talking about that essentially in Western culture right now, if you were born in a relatively healthy body without any like predisposed whatever disabilities or chronic illnesses, you can get away with you can do what you want for a decent amount of time without much repercussions.
yeah, well, that comes back to the conversation about what does it mean to want something, which I do think is a big part of what we generally are struggling with, but what many of us as individual people are struggling with even more. And yes, there's a correlation with people who identify as neurodivergent. But yeah, no, pretty much everybody, I mean, I can't say 100% all. My son, my older two sons are both officially identified as disabled, different disabilities, disabled. And it affects them in different ways. Certainly my middle child is more impacted by his disabilities, but my older son has what's called congenital hypothyroidism, that when he was born, this is 1 in 4,000 people, when he was born, the thyroid gland, either his body just didn't grow one or it grew one potentially in the wrong place. Either way, it doesn't work. He does not generate his own thyroid hormone. In the past, that led to a condition that colloquially was known as cretinism. It's where the insult cretin comes from. And effectively, the easiest way for me to like help people understand what the impact of that was is think of Sloth from the Goonies. Literally like disfigured faces and bodies, massive intellectual disability.
Oh my God.
A lot of when people are referring to things like the village idiot, they're referring to people who had congenital hypothyroidism. They developed differently. Their tongues loll out of their mouth. Their muscles are more lax. Their cheeks and stomach are more distended, etc. Nowadays, literally, every baby born in the hospital, at least here, they do a blood workup. They take some blood and they run it for about, 400 different things. And one of the things that they run it for, this is required by law, that they do this. One of the things they run it for is congenital hypothyroidism. So they identify it within a day or two of being born. And the solution is he has to take a pill every morning of his life. I mean, when he was a baby, it was, a liquid we had to mix in with stuff, but he has to take a pill because as long as he takes the synthetic thyroid that is supplied through the pill, his development is exactly the same as if his body was generating that thyroid hormone. This is a disability. It is a disability that affects him not at all outside of the fact that he has to take a pill once every day. It would have changed his life to a ludicrous degree.
Yeah.
But all he has to do is take a pill. We didn't have to notice any symptoms. He never experienced a symptom of it.
Wow.
Because it's a developmental thing.
Yeah.
It's not in the moment. Like if he misses a pill for a day, it doesn't affect him that day. It just needs to. He never experienced a symptom. We never had to have a problem notice it. We checked it preemptively because they check it for everybody, even though it only affects 1 out of 4,000 people.
Wow.
And he takes a pill every day. So I'm saying, even for people who are disabled, not that that is a typical experience of it. He has other disabilities as well. But even for people who are disabled, life is still better for you now than it would have been in the past.
Yeah.
And not any point in the past. There are definitely ups and downs, right? Like I do believe that things are harder for many classes of identity which would be considered to be oppressed, right? Like people with identities, oppressed identities.
Mhm.
I think things are harder in some ways for them now than it would have been 10, 15 years ago, but in other ways better too. But not 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Like there are
Not the 1950s
downturns.
Christmas.
Right. So yes, it is natural. And everyone's, why are so many people autistic and ADHD? Because everybody is incentivized to spend their resources on the internal cognitive environment more than the external physical one. I literally don't have to pay attention to my temperature, my body temperature, most of the time, because most of the time I'm in a temperature controlled environment. When you don't, how does everybody do when they're sitting and it's 90 degrees and sweltering? How does everybody do when it's 50 degrees and they're freezing? Are you thinking as much, or are you mostly feeling what you're feeling?
Yeah.
We have made a specific effort to solve those problems. That doesn't mean the resources we were spending on those problems just go away.
Yeah.
They just get diverted to other different problems. It's the hierarchy of needs. Why are high schoolers all talking about mental health and depression? Because we're telling them to. We're telling them that what matters is the cognitive. You want to know why people have a hard time with paying attention to interoceptive data? Well, from when you were 5 years old, when you needed to pee, you raised your hand and asked if you could go to the bathroom. And sometimes the answer was no. And other times people said, hey, we're about to leave, go to the bathroom. Well, I don't feel the need to. I don't care. You need to do it anyway. And those are valid things. It is better when I'm about to get in the car with my kids for a 5-hour drive for us all to pee before we go. But it also disincentivizes paying attention to the need to pee. You make the decision based on when is it optimal, not when do I feel it. So yeah, you pay less attention to it. You eat when it's mealtime, so you pay less attention to being hungry. You drink when it's a drink break, so you pay less. And all those things make sense. Nobody's doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
And a lot of those things have gotten a lot better. Many, especially in areas that have more money for education and whatever, many schools will have bathrooms in kindergarten classrooms at this point, so that kindergartners can still learn to like pay attention. But it still changes eventually.
Yeah.
So of course we pay less attention to it. It's not very useful data compared to what it used to be. You used to go to the bathroom whenever you felt the need to. That wasn't better.
I think also thinking of neurodiversity as a gauge that's changing throughout like the development of human history or whatever, I think that's also a way to acknowledge like the inclusivity of the paradigm versus, which I know that you're pointing out in other ways, but versus like we are neurodivergent and that makes us special, and neurotypical people are just kind of annoying and boring. Like I do think that, which sometimes is the vibe. I don't think people explicitly say
no,
that.
that is, people do explicitly say that, and it is often, or at least frequently, the vibe. Yeah. And it
but
is.
But it also, go ahead.
No,
sorry.
please.
But it's also a beautiful way to, surprise, I love language, but to think about the change in young people, because I think a lot of people are very concerned about it, but I think to think about, well, certain needs are met and there are disproportionate resources in the cognitive environment for many reasons, and so why wouldn't they be talking about mental health?
Yeah.
And it's not like that's the only factor, but I think it's really interesting. And I think that also plays out with like debates about gender.
Oh yeah.
And other sort of things where
languages.
And then you find like millennials saying just
which is not the nicest way to express a sentiment that I think is a valid theoretical sentiment.
Yeah.
Which is that when a singular group of people maintains power over a culture, what they do for the amount of time that they're in power is attempt to make that culture stagnant. That's what every generation has ever done.
That's also such an that's such a brief and effective conceptualization of how, like, the New York Times will talk about changes in liberalism. Wow, this is just blowing my mind. I love being on the street.
If you evaluate politics in America from about 1960 onward, everything is just what made most sense for the baby boom generation at that time. When they're all very young, it's very progressive. As soon as they all start making money, when they're in their 20s and 30s, then it shifts to, oh, I am socially Democrat, but fiscally conservative. It's the Reagan Revolution.
And then they put it all in the stock market, and then they have money to retire.
Yeah.
Not all. Sorry.
No,
the
but
people who
generally
had
and broadly,
the,
yes. And yes,
Yeah.
again, I'm not actually faulting any individual, even though I understand the sentiment and there's some truth to the idea that things won't change until different people are in power. Quite literally, like in the United States, you know, we have senators who have been senators for 50 plus years, like more than a handful, you know.
And some of them are literally like losing their ability to remember and track things, but the system is keeping them
There's
in.
at least evidence to suggest that that might be happening. Yeah, no, it's, but it, again, what I'm saying is that's not a bad thing for any individual to do. What any individual is doing is saying, look, I have figured some stuff out that works. And I'm trying to help everyone to understand this is how it works. And no individual human has the ability to see beyond their own perspective, except that we can learn to listen to other people who are offering other things. But if everything in my life is going very well and all the people that I love and care about, everyone listens to some people. And if all the people that I'm listening to are saying it all is going well, whatever, and then other people are coming in and saying that the things that work for us should change, of course I'm incentivized to say, no, thank you. And that goes for progressives too, right? Like if someone comes in and says, no, you need to change the way you're thinking about gender because what you're doing is blah, blah, blah. Then no, we have figured out how we like to think about it. Thank you.
Yeah.
That thing you were referring to, neurodivergent people are special and neurotypical people are annoying and lame, whatever. Yeah, that's a sentiment that a lot of people have. And it is no different than any other version of people like me are cool and people who are not like me are lame. That any person and any group has said for the history of the world.
Well, and that's an interesting part of, I feel like, the progressive liberal wing of the United States, primarily like millennials and younger, is like, how do we get out of this binary of good and bad while literally pushing for the dissolving? I don't know what the word. Dissolution of binaries.
Yeah.
So there's such a great irony in it, but it's
because
not that it's a bad thing.
Because you're proposing that a binary is a bad thing when you're trying to,
like, let's wash away all the binaries except for the binary that says these people are
except for the binary that says binaries are bad. Yeah. No, it's, I think when it comes to binaries, the most useful way to think of it is every individual person is finite. We have limited resources, right? And knowing about a thing is spending resources on it. The minimum amount of resources you can spend on something is none, and that means you're just unaware of it. Like if I ask either of you what you think about the leaks for the Chapter 2 set, The Rise of the Floodborn for Disney Lorcana that's coming.
And then I'm going to say, I'm not as cool as you, Brandon.
You have zero awareness of it because it is irrelevant to you. There are many, many things that you could say that I have zero awareness of because it's irrelevant to me. Nobody has a problem with understanding that we don't all pay attention to the same stuff. Well, the next minimal amount of resources you can spend besides zero on something is to know that it exists in a static state. That this is a thing. Oxygen. It's there, right? The next most resources, the next fewest, I suppose, the next most resources you could spend on it is to understand that it isn't static. A thing can be one thing or the other. Well, it's day, but it's not always day. Sometimes it's night. Or people are alive, but then sometimes they're dead. It's a binary. You don't spend resources unless there's a reason. Is there actually a binary distinction between day and night? No. Is there actually a binary distinction between life and death? No. But do any of us really need to spend that much of our limited resources learning the nuanced distinctions between day and night and living and death? For the most part, no. And so, yes, when someone is saying that there are men and there are women, that is a simplistic, reductive understanding of how it works. And it's the most that they've had to spend.
It works for them.
It's causing them no problems to think of it in a binary sense. It's only when something causes you a problem that it's worth spending resources understanding it in more nuance. So the solution, to whatever extent that there is a solution, is just to listen to one another and trust one another. None of us can know everything about everything. We shouldn't feel guilty about our inability to know everything about everything. Oh no, I said something that I didn't know was offensive to somebody and they were offended by it. You can't know everything that will be offensive. What you can do is listen when somebody points out to you that something is offensive. And instead of feeling so bad and guilty, which disincentivizes you from believing people who say that. How dare you say that? I am not trying to be offensive.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Instead, you just say, oh, thank you for sharing that with me. That wasn't my intention. I apologize.
Mhm.
It's a
Yeah.
lot simpler.
Well, and it's interesting to think if theoretically throughout the 40 years of the boomers being in power that there was more diversity, even just in generational power, how different things might be. And I
Yeah.
just,
And that, I mean, again, that's an inevitable, I think, beneficial thing for us as a species
Mhm.
is this cycle of, no, we don't put the 5-year-olds in charge of everybody.
Mhm.
There is actually inherent benefit to having more time in existence on this
Mhm.
earth to experience and learn and
Yeah.
grow and develop and blah, blah, blah. And then there's a point at which, okay, now you're generating some good ideas. And that's not, some people will get some really great ideas when they're 2 years old and some won't ever and whatever. It's not,
Yeah.
but statistically, by and large, the older a cohort gets, the more, the higher volume of good ideas that cohort is presenting to everybody. And then on the other side, there is decline. And I don't even mean the decline of age. I just mean like the inherent decline of, as soon as you figure something out, you stop paying attention to it.
Yeah, there's that joke about like once people hit 50, they never change or whatever. Like,
Right. Which is a useful and
in some ways,
whatever joke, but obviously isn't literally true.
Yeah.
You know, like people who are 50 watch new shows and play new games. And, you know, like everybody's changing all the time to some extent. But yes, when I play a video game and I beat it, I don't go play the same video game again. Or if I do, I'm not doing the parts of it that I already did and enjoyed and figured out. I'm doing different things. When you solve a problem, you stop thinking about the problem. You just continue to enact the solution that you came up with.
But also, if you solve problems using binaries, then your solutions aren't really solutions, and then you think you have all these solutions.
Anything that most
and then
people
you get stuck. I know that's not what you're saying, but I think it's another aspect of. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. No. People get stuck. No, I interrupted you.
And I interrupted you back.
People get stuck because, for example, gender is a construct. That's a thing a lot of people will say and a lot of people believe, people with whom I tend to agree and share values.
Sentence.
The vast majority of them, if you say, what exactly does that mean? Have no idea. And that's fine. That's not an insult to them.
Well, and I was thinking when you were describing this that I am guessing that the majority of people who identify as neurodivergent right now have some sort of oppressed identity that has caused them to think beyond the binaries and challenge typical ways of thinking, which then gets them to be more likely to identify as neurodivergent because it is advantageous to them to view life in that way. Similar to how you're talking about like the boomers solving problems and then the problem is solved. But if you have a problem that the other people don't have and you're forced to solve it, then acknowledging differences and nuances you almost like need to do.
Yeah. That's like we say all the time, the simplest answer that works is the best one.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm struggling because I keep forgetting stuff and someone says, well, just write it down, and I do that and it works, great. What a great solution.
Mm-hmm.
And it's common because it works commonly. Not, I don't think it works nearly as much as people think that it does, but it is to some extent beneficial frequently. It's only when that doesn't work for you that it's worth saying, all right, I need to understand this in a little more depth. I need to spend more time.
And something I like about neurodivergence is at least in like pop culture version of neurodivergence is I'll have clients come in who instead of saying like, oh, I'm so effed up because these ADHD hacks don't work for me, it's like, well, maybe I'm quite neurodivergent and maybe some of the hacks like work for some people but not for me, and maybe like that isn't as much of a deficit in me and maybe I just need a creative therapist or whatever.
Wonderful when that happens. And there's also a lot of people who come in and say, man, even the stuff that is supposed to help people with neurodivergent tendencies or even ADHDers doesn't work for me, so I must be even more messed up. What's wrong with me? Yeah. Like I can't possibly have ADHD because I don't match everything that other people say about people with ADHD, and some of the stuff that's supposed to work for people with ADHD doesn't work for me, so I must not have ADHD. It must be something else that's wrong with me. And yeah, it really is, the larger scale something gets, the more importance rules hold, right? Like if it's in my family, there are three, my nuclear family, my wife and my three kids in our house, the people I live with, there are three children. And we don't really have rules too much because we don't really need them too much because I can pay attention to each individual's child and each individual circumstance. If I am teaching a class, which I have in the past with 25 kids in it, and then the next hour is a different set of, I have a bunch of rules because I can't learn 300 different children well enough and dedicate enough time. I can barely manage it with three. In fact, I think when it went from 2 to 3, I had to step it back probably a little bit, how much I was paying attention to each individual.
Well, which makes sense.
Right.
It's not a deficiency in you, it's a product
right.
of your environment.
It's not what I would want it to be, and it's not enjoyable. It is the reality of the amount of time and energy I was spending per child.
Yeah.
I don't have that much time and energy for 3 children. So the total time and energy I'm spending went up quite a bit, but not quite 3 times what it was before, or an additional 50% of what it was before. Anyway.
1.333.
Yes, we operate in a very large scale society that has so many benefits to it. And it requires some trade-offs, just like being neurodivergent has benefits to it and some trade-offs. Any specialization means that you're better suited to the thing you're specialized in and worse suited to literally anything and everything else that you don't specialize in. And the further those things are from the you can generalize from your specialty to other things. Like, I don't play every card game, but put any game in front of me, I'll probably pick it up and be pretty good at it pretty quick. And we're there are people in this world whose entire life is devoted to the study of a very specific and small population of a fruit fly, and not even the whole thing, just their breeding habits. Which I use that specific example because that was Alfred Kinsey's.
Oh, really?
He studied the breeding habits of fruit flies.
Well, he generalized that.
It's a very fascinating
But
conversation.
also, I don't know if you're tracking the time. It's 2.
Yeah.
Well, the point was just when people are able to specialize in these tiny things, they can learn stuff that they wouldn't otherwise learn. And not always does that translate to benefit for everybody else, but sometimes it turns out, that person studying that thing also experienced some sexual difficulties with their wife and saw a counselor, a doctor, and taught at a university. And then kids found out at the university that they knew some stuff about that, and they took it upon themselves to start educating people about sex and so on and so forth. And every element of that matters. We don't get the benefit of that work, and there's problems in that work too, obviously, but we don't get whatever value comes out of it without the fact that that person was at first able to study the breeding habits of a specific species of fruit fly that relates to everything else.
This reminds me a lot. There's a podcast with an interview of the Airbnb CEO, and he said something similar. So maybe you guys should be friends.
Well, that makes me nervous. I just assume that person is problematic, but maybe that's unfair.
Well, he went to Rhode Island School of Design, and so he was talking about being an artist and starting a company and how most of the people in power are more like scientific brains. There's so many things he said, but it was similar to that with like, if I wouldn't have been this random thing and this random thing and this random thing and this random thing, and they all connect, and then it turned into this idea, and then
which is why it becomes about embracing
Airbnb.
who you are instead of trying to think that you should be somebody different, right?
And then you don't regret your past.
It's not that you don't regret it per se.
Trying to loop the conversation
that you
around.
take the value from it that it has and allow it to have the cost that it has instead of trying to evaluate it as either good or bad.
And let's all have some ice cream. Thanks for coming. There's an ice cream shop right across the street.
How dare you? I am lactose intolerant.
Well, then we'll have some sorbet. Or a Trader Joe's. This is also not a Trader Joe's ad, but they have a coconut chocolate ice cream. So good.
Oh, yes, please. Yeah.
We'll just have a whole podcast where we share recommendations with people.
I'm totally fine with sponsorships, but it's against your...
I will never.
I know, never.
Never. I will.
I'm totally ready to have a Coca-Cola in my hand.
I will not accept sponsorship money.
Oh my gosh.
How would I want that? Ugh.
Oh, so gross.
It's not that it's gross. It's just that it's limiting and unnecessary.
It is limiting.
The whole point of running a business that we run, doing the practice that we do in order to make money, is so that we can afford to do other things without having to.
To be very clear to the internet, I was kidding.
Yeah, I know.
I'll stick a disclaimer on the show notes. I like that.
But really, I mean, I do think that is the aim here is you make enough money so that you can do other things without having to. This is literally true for everybody. You're aiming to make enough money in some of your activities
So I can
to
go
make
to a
it so that
pottery
you're
class.
able to do other activities without having to worry about making money. And this is one of those things, I don't have to worry about making money on it. So yeah, why would I want a sponsorship?
Yeah. I think it would be fun, this is just me, but to like decide when to like drop it. So like you say you're like just but anyway,
Brought to
that's
you
me
by
deciding.
Breyers Ice Cream.
Like
Brought to you by Oberweis.
Oberweis. You have to say it in a European way.
Yeah. All right, we should go.
Okay, we should really go, but this was so
I don't
much fun.
envy you, Marie, for having to somehow like encapsulate what we talked about in a social.
Yeah, this week's going to be fun. Yeah, but I really, really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you.
And thanks for bringing it right back around to ice cream.
Yeah, I tried it. This is the pattern, and Brandon's nope. He just breaks it every time.
Yeah,
I
Brandon,
always think of a clever joke to
in case
end it
it's
with.
not clear, Brandon does not resolve things.
I
Brandon
don't resolve.
asks questions. He prompts questions. He doesn't.
So
answer
maybe
them.
Brandon should allow Caitlin to resolve things because I am a Virgo.
I should allow you to do that, and yet I consistent. Just
so
like I should
going
end
to
sessions
head
on time.
over to the ice cream shop.
All right.
Do that. And yeah, enjoy.
Oh my gosh.
Coconut ice cream sounds good. Thank you both. It's been really fun. And if you were here watching along, thanks for joining. This show will go out again on YouTube on Wednesday, so keep an eye on the YouTube channel. Like and subscribe. That's as close as I'll get to sponsored.
Yeah, like and subscribe. I
Oh,
love
when
that.
you go like this, you're like, go here. There's a button right here.
Self-promotion, nothing wrong with that. We want people to hear what we're saying. We're not
We're
ashamed of
sponsoring
that.
ourselves.
Okay.
We're sponsored by Victor.
Yep, we pay for our own time on this. Yes.
I thought that was so
Excuse me.
funny. I'm sorry.
No, we believe in what we're saying, and we believe in offering it. That doesn't mean we think it will help everyone all the time and solve every problem, but we think it is potentially helpful to a significant number of people, or we wouldn't bother offering it.
And we believe in how cool Marie is.
And I'm saying this really to myself because I don't like self-promotion. But yeah, we should say like and subscribe and spread the word if you would like to.
Yeah, share with all your friends and family. We would really appreciate it. I should put on a like robotic voice.
I would say just share it with somebody if you think they would like it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about whether we would like it or not. I honestly don't really care.
I care way more than you care.
Well, fair enough. I care that people who are watching it feel as though they get something out of it. I don't
Which
want
is great.
people to be watching it that don't feel like they're getting anything.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
So if you like it, watch it. If you think someone else might like it, suggest it.
Thank you for your clarification. In fact, we agree.
Yeah, I did the thing again. Look,
And you're the
ending
one who
stuff,
knows how to push the button to end it.
it's not my strong point, all right? This is why we work in community. Thank you for being
exactly.
strong at it.
Thank you,
Caitlin,
Marie.
And thank you, Marie.
Good to see you both. Thanks for
Okay,
watching.
bye. Goodbye, Internet.